everyone, welcome to another Music Talk Tuesday, and today I thought it would be interesting to sort of dive into, uh, in particular, the sort of uh, genre of opera. I guess you could consider it a genre and even its own sort of art form as well. And the best way in which I could sort of explain exactly the way in which to, I guess, interpret opera is think of it as the sort of building blocks for what eventually becomes sort of musicals within the modern day realm. Now, obviously, musicals are significantly different than opera, but their origin stems a lot through the opera style format in which you have a story being showcased on the stage, um, and some of that is expressed through song, or at least opera, at least from what I can tell, primarily focuses more on trying to sing the majority of the piece. But at the same time, you have uh, not only a story behind it, but you also have an orchestra as well. And again, it's pretty similar to that musical format, and was really the building blocks for what would eventually become musicals that are more so common today. Even though opera is still very significant and holds a sort of high regard, I think, within the sort of arts community. Um, but basically, opera is actually the Italian word for work, at least from what my research, that is what it says, or at least claims to say. Uh, also, opera, uh, since it is an Italian word, obviously originated from Italy. So the whole concept of an opera was executed within the later 1500s within Italy. The first one that they have, as far as a record of, is Daphne by Jacopo Peri, I believe that's how you pronounce it. And basically, this particular opera follows the story of Apollo falling in love with a nymph named Daphne. So you can see that there was a lot of influence drawn from adapting a lot of the classical kind of Greek stories, obviously a lot of Roman stories as well, and really trying to capture the very kind of what we would come to know as really like classical style. And a lot of that falls into the category of being opera. And eventually, opera carries over throughout Europe, and actually is fairly popular, at least from what I could tell, within New York, at least within the United States, since that's more of the kind of musical and arts kind of capital, at least within America. But what's very, I think, important to understand too about opera is it was a significant portion, or at least had a huge influence onto a lot of early classical musicians' careers. For example, Handel, uh, as well as Mozart, they composed operas and were heavily involved in trying to really orchestrate these operas, uh, and it's just quite fascinating to see that particular kind of genre really play an influence into what we even consider classical music. And it's really nice to see that sort of uh, kind of sort of part of the history in that sense. Um, Also, its influence within, in particular, the Baroque era is very important to note because again, this was really the era of really kind of when Europe was entering this sort of, um, I guess, sort of uh, resurgence as far as, you know, art and literature and things of that nature. And so I think it only makes sense that within this period we would get such a significant amount of material that we sort of carry on even till today. So I think it's definitely safe to say that history did play a significant role into the sort of success and the interest in opera. Um, and although this interest is not as influential as it was back then, because again, opera was really a huge form of entertainment, um, along with the theater as well, unlike today where we have the television and the internet. So I think it only makes sense that this particular form would gander up a significant audience to wanting to at least explore it during the time. Uh, I think now it holds a more kind of higher acclaim, even when you say sort of the word opera, you know, it has this kind of classy, very kind of rich feel to it, you know, it's very sophisticated, especially when you say you're gonna go see an opera. It's just kind of, you know, you give off this air of, you know, like you're kind of, you know, along high, or you have some kind of, you know, uh, really classy kind of taste, I guess. So it gives off, I think, a good impression. Obviously, though, these operas can be costly, in the same way that a lot of these other uh, musicals on Broadway are fairly costly. Um, and the influence, though, to reach a broader audience, though, I think, um, obviously can be attributed to the internet, and opera generating maybe some influence there as well. But as far as its uh, prominence, I can say that obviously it's a little bit less mainstream than it initially was. And I think, again, this could be due to a variety of different factors, but um, it's really nice to see these kinds of things still being kind of recreated and showcased. Um, Obviously, I think this the aspect of opera that um, I think deters a lot of people is the fact that it is primarily in European languages. So you largely don't understand what the people are singing about, and it's sort of hard to follow. But I think there's been sort of various accommodations to go with that. I think they have now translations of operas that they'll have sort of on a bigger screen. So when you're viewing it, you can actually see what the person is saying within the respective language. Um, or at least I think, depending on what country you're in, uh, you know, there's a certain level of accommodation. And the interesting thing too about opera as well is that it is a little bit more, uh, I almost want to say gaudy, in the sense that, you know, it's very epic. It has this huge amount of grandeur to it. Whereas musicals are a little bit more grounded, and they're maybe not as complex. Because when you hear somebody singing opera, you can tell by just the way that their voice goes up and down that they have to make a concerted effort to try and maintain those changes, within the music as they're singing. So again, there is a certain, I think, amount of um, difficulty and also a certain amount of wonder to the whole experience of it, because again, it has this very interesting style to it that obviously is completely different to the majority, at least, of musicals that are out nowadays. And it's quite fascinating, and I think it's good that these operas are still around, and still kind of are held to a high standard. And it's also really nice to see the opera theaters, because these theaters are just so unbelievably beautiful. Just the way in which they are constructed, and just how they try to kind of, even at some points, kind of recreate the whole experience of what sort of an opera house would at least look like within the period in which operas were really popular. And I think that's just something that's really good to see, and is a lot of, it makes the experience all that more authentic, I guess. And although I've never personally experienced an opera, what I can say is that there is certain aspects to it that I think people can, I think, enjoy, but at the same time, I can understand if it's not into everybody's best taste. Only because, sometimes the way in which the people sing, the notes are so lengthy, they go constantly up and down, and the way in which the operas are performed is obviously very different, considering the fact that it's more focused on singing and not necessarily, and again, acting is part of it as well, but not so much of dialogue, at least compared to the more modern day musicals that are, again, trying to kind of recreate a story, but in doing so having kind of conversation. Whereas opera, it's just kind of like, for the majority, at least from my exposure, is that it's heavily influenced through the singing and through the orchestra. But I think that's really all I can say about opera as a sort of genre and entertainment art form. I think there can be a lot to appreciate from it. Obviously, again, it is definitely not everybody's, it's not something that I think everybody will like or be interested in. But again, there is a lot of variations as far as operas are concerned, ranging from stories and, languages. So there is a certain extent to where you can kind of look into it and sort of figure out what kinds of operas you kind of gravitate towards, or if you like certain ones, because it is quite fascinating and has a significance as far as history. And it'd be nice for it to kind of keep going and still be kind of preserved, because it is an important part of art and entertainment, I think, in general. But I think that's really all I can say, though, about this particular topic. If there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.